My name is George Crispin. I've been a member of Woodbury Meeting since my father and mother took me here when I was 2 years old. That was a long time ago. And we are coming up on celebrating our 300th anniversary. Woodbury Friends Meeting has been here for 300 years. It was started to be built in 1714. And it was finished that year. And it has been here ever since. What we are going to do now is to conduct a tour of the meeting, both inside and out, and the grounds and the graveyard, and we hope this is helpful and beneficial to everybody. The beginning of the settlement of this area by Quakers started in 1682. In May of 1682, Henry Wood was in jail in England. He had been converted to Quakerism, and he had been persecuted for his worship of Quakerism. And many, many Quakers were in jail in 1682 in England. So the authorities made a deal, and that was that they would allow Henry Wood to leave the country and leave jail if he would promise never to come back, and if he did, that he would be executed. And so Henry Wood gained the permission of the Quakers in that area and decided to set sail for America. They did set sail for America in the spring of 1682, and they arrived in the fall, the early fall of 1682, down along the river. And the river is down there. That is Woodbury Creek. They bought 300 acres of land, and they settled there. And for a period of about 40 years, the Quakers settled the area. In the spring of 1683, John Wood, the son of Henry Wood, borrowed a canoe and paddled up what was then and is now the Woodbury Creek. And when he got to what he found to be an Indian trail, that he thought would be a very good place for a settlement. And that became the settlement that we now know as Woodbury. This road here, Broad Street, was an Indian trail, and it traveled all the way from Salem, down in Salem, New Jersey, all the way up through Woodbury and on up to Burlington and further on. And this trail was north and south. And then the Woodbury Creek was east and west. And so it was a very good place to settle because you had mobility in those two directions. And so what happened was that as the area became settled and more Quakers came to the area, that they decided to move more and more inland, and the little cabin they had been using as a Quaker meeting house became too small. And so they decided that they would find a place that they could build a meeting house, and this became the ideal site because it is on a hill. And it is close to the Indian Trail that now becomes Broad Street and Woodbury Creek, which at the time was called Red Bank Creek. Now, one of the things we have to do in our minds is we have to roll back the clock and imagine what this area was like in 1683 when John Wood paddled up the Woodbury Creek. First of all, it is all forest as far as the eye can see. It is forest. This place, which is now known as Woodbury, had one farm, to the best of our knowledge, that was a 200-acre farm that was settled by a Swede, and his name was Wallace Swenson. That farm, I think, later on became the Twells farm, and I can remember as a child seeing that farm out my school window. So there was a farm here within my lifetime, within the bounds of Woodbury history. Over there, beyond that, and toward the creek, was another farm that was the Tatum farm. That was a Quaker family who settled there. And so what happened was that the Quakers decided, and this was a Quaker group that included the grandson of Henry Wood, whose name was also Henry Wood, and they decided to buy a tract of land here, which they did. This parcel of land is today 2.6 acres, and it was thought to be an ideal spot for the building of a meeting house. And so, in the summer of 1713, they started to build a meeting house here, and the chief architect was John Cooper. John Cooper was a rather famous man. He was supporting of the American Revolution. He became a state senator in the first New Jersey State Senate, and he was a participant in the writing of the first New Jersey Constitution. We are standing in the burial ground of the Woodbury Friends meeting, and it tells us a lot about the history of the meeting. So as we look out over this burial ground, one of the things that we notice almost immediately is that the stones on this side are facing east and west. That is west, that is east. And the stones all face east and west. And the stones over there face north and south. In 1826, when they had the Orthodox Hicksite split in the meeting, they didn't divide they didn't have one group leave. They simply divided the grounds. And so this became the Hicksite side of the burial ground, and all the burials that took place on this side were the Hicksite, and that became the Orthodox. And so in addition to that, we can determine by the names on the stones, we can determine who was Hicksite and who was Orthodox. The Woodalls over there, the Knights over here, they were the Orthodox. These were the Hicksites. And so this is no longer true today because we no longer have that kind of separation. The other thing about where I'm standing that I would like to point out is that we have the tombstone here of a William Tatum and his wife Anne. William Tatum owned the land that went from the meeting house property north, and there was a stream there which we know as the Woodbury Creek, and beyond that, exactly how many acres I'm not quite sure, but the meeting house grounds itself is 2.6 acres. But there are several things about William Tatum that ought to be mentioned. The first thing is that this, what we call Broad Street today, was a trail at that time that cut in front of the Woodbury Creek, and then it became narrower farther down east, and they crossed. And his property was a farm that covered that ground, and William Tatum gave 20 acres of land on the west side of what today is Broad Street, but was then that trail. He gave 20 acres of land for African Americans to be buried, and that land stood there, was there all the way up to a relatively few years ago, where the hospital bought the land.